Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. Thank you all for tuning in to the AAMP Book Club. My name is Hannah Wallace, and I'm the Educational Programming Manager for the African American Museum in Philadelphia. Welcome again. So today I am joined by two docents, Alisa Rashid and Richard White. They will be facilitating our discussion today on our book by Colson Whitehead, The Underground Railroad. I'm going to pass over the program to Alisa Rashid and Richard White so we can begin our discussion of the Underground Railroad.
Hello, welcome to our book club meeting here at the African American Museum in Philadelphia. My name is Alisa Rashid, and the co-facilitator for tonight's discussion is Richard White. Hi, Richard.
How you doing, Lisa?
This month's book selection is The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. I just want to give you a brief literary background of Colson's works. Colson Whitehead is the author of 7 novels and 2 books of nonfiction. In 2016, he won the National Book Award for Fiction for The Underground Railroad, and in 2017, the Pulitzer Prize in Fiction for the same book. He also won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction again in 2020 for The Nickel Boys. Colson has become only the 4th writer ever to win the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction twice. The Underground Railroad has been translated into 40 languages. I'm going to give you a brief summary of the book for those of you who may not have completed it or read it, And so as a side note, I'm going to use slave instead of enslaved to be consistent with the language in the novel. Cora is a slave on the cotton plantation in Georgia. Life is hell for all slaves, but especially bad for Cora, an outcast even amongst her fellow Africans. She's coming into womanhood where even greater pain awaits. When Caesar, a recent arrival from Virginia, tells her about the Underground Railroad, they decide to take a terrifying risk and escape. Matters do not go as planned. Cora kills a young white boy by mistake who tries to capture her. Though they managed to find a station and head north, they were being hunted. In Whitehead's ingenious conception, the Underground Railroad is no mere metaphor. Engineers and conductors operate a network of tracks and tunnels beneath the southern soil. Cora and Caesar's first stop is South Carolina, in a city that initially seems like a haven. But the city plastic surface, mass, and insidious scheme designed for its Black people. Even worse, Ridgeway, the relentless slave catcher, is close on their heels. Forced to flee again, Cora embarks on a harrowing flight, state by state, seeking true freedom. As Whitehead brilliantly recreates the unique terror for Black people in the pre-Civil War era, his narrative seamlessly weaves the saga of America from the brutal importation of Africans to the unfulfilled promises of the present day. Richard?
It's interesting, at least as we, we're going through the book and having discussions about it, the thing that struck me, one was the title, right? Underground Railroad. And we know that next year there'll be a celebration for William Still's 200th birthday, and the book that he wrote, or the compilation he put together to assist Africans in Philadelphia, called The Underground Railroad. But it was like three things in the book that made the correlation to our main exhibit at the African American Museum in Philadelphia. One was the point of him utilizing the term city of Pennsylvania, knowing that Philadelphia is a place where freedom seekers were able to come to. The other thing that struck me was in the book how when we do our narrative, you mentioned the whole thing of William Still and just the whole thing of longing for freedom, and one thing in the book, Cora basically was also trying to reluctantly and with aspiration, trying to connect with her mother. Um, and that was an interesting correlation that we made, I made in the book. And then the point of the freedom, I mean, the don't buy slave produce. It was a section in there early on where they were talking about, and you can see we kind of put those parts that were in the book, we kind of put that there, but so you can read, for those in the audience could be able to read. But the other thing, as far as don't buy slave produce, that notion that here is this free Black community making this position that we're going to not support slavery by buying anything that was slave produced. And then finally, in the city of Philadelphia, where liberation and freedom reigns, as they tell us, that Cora's notion, her drive to be free. I thought that was also an interesting correlation between the novel and what we do as docents at the museum.
I look at Audacious Freedom as historical information, historical background of people of African descent striving to get this whole notion of freedom, this notion of freedom, justice, and equality. When I think about Colson Whitehead, his novel was grounded in historical information, which directly to me relates to what the Audacious Freedom is about. I kind of connected with Robert Purvis and William Whipper, who are two of the abolitionists on our display on Audacious Freedom, and relate them to John Valentine's in the Underground Railroad, and how he built communities and took in not only people who were free, but people who were enslaved. So I see a lot of connections. Both of them are grounded in history. Both of them are showing people of African descent being bold and audacious in fighting for freedom, justice, and equality, and striving to show that they're human, because this is something that the Declaration has done, is to show people of African descent that they're not human. So I see a lot of correlations, and I think that when I read his book and the whole notion of the Underground Railroad, I think, as you said, William Still, Harriet Tubman are symbols that I see throughout the novel, even though he doesn't mention their name, but just the mere fact, the work that they and their contributions to helping enslaved Africans.
It brought something to me, Elise, as we were, a curiosity question came to me that I wondered how the audience may respond, if they were here, as you say, being audacious, being bold, and they liberated themselves or freed themselves. What would be three things that they would do? Here you now come to a free space, right? Pennsylvania, Philadelphia in particular. You have these abolitionists. I would like to see people put in the chat, at least, to see, here we are in 2020, not having that kind of mindset and concern. How, if we were in that place, in that moment, what would we do? And I wonder what kind of responses we would get from the audience. I think Hannah may share, what comes in as we as people respond to that.
Toby Schwait, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He said to get an education. I wrote change my appearance, because that was something I like. They had the ads at the beginning of each chapter. And that was something that I always noticed, was that they would list, what the person would typically look like, and, what they would be wearing and all that. So that was the first thing I thought of, if I had just escaped, somehow change your appearance, so that you wouldn't be recognized right away. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I look, I wouldn't be satisfied where I'm like, I want to get as far away as possible from even though Pennsylvania is a liberated zone, I still would want to keep moving.
If you go to Pennsylvania, you have the 1780 gradual abolition law. So depending if she can get there and hide, and as Hannah say, change your appearance, if you can, if it's possible, connect with William Still. And if she managed to stay, if I can stay 6 months, then I may be able to gain my freedom. But first hide until I can make some connections and then change my appearance and see if I can connect with William Still.
We have Annie Thomason. She said,
Mhm.
help those that were left on the plantation to become free. And I wanted to go back to Toby Schwait real quick. Toby, if you are open to it, just elaborate a little bit. We'll take you off mute just for you to speak on your thoughts of education after freedom.
How you doing, Toby?
Yes.
Good evening, everybody. This is this third time I've been in a discussion about this wonderful book as well, and I've read several others of his, and so I'm a big fan. An education would not only help me, but I think it would help others, and that would further myself and my fellow men, so to speak.
And since you've been in the discussion, one thing that Cora continuously do throughout the novel is at first indirectly, but more directly, is go about this educating herself. And one of the tools that she favored was the almanac as a means compared to anything else as far as a means of that education until she got to the place.
I do have a question concerning her visions. I mean, the book itself has a touch of magical realism to it.
Yes, you're correct.
Right.
Yes.
And, but I think I've been told that Harriet herself had perhaps epilepsy, or I don't know where that came from. Does anybody want to chime in on that?
Sure. She was hit in the head with the heavy piece by one of the slave owners. And so as a result, she would get, as they say, spells or epilepsy. It might have been that, because at that time they didn't know what it was, but she did suffer from spells from that hit in the head. It didn't stop her from going back and forth and getting folks and bringing them.
Right.
But yes, and every now and then she would have to sit down because those as you say, spells overcame her. But yeah, she was hit in the head, and that caused that reaction. In fact, they hit a lot of the enslaved Africans for some odd reason in the head.
Yeah, I think with Cora, I think his name was Lawrence. The experience she had of being hit was more, I don't know if it was in the head, but she suffered some real views. But the magical part, and I've heard this in others, is in relationship to her dreams and dreaming about freedom. The novel didn't seem to be magical. It seemed to be a naive experience of how do I become free. And I say naive because when she gets to North Carolina, she believes that this is the place, right? South Carolina is not sure. And then even when what was that? Where is that? Indiana?
Indiana, the last stop, Indiana.
You know, the question of what, I don't think that's magical more than being naive that that you, just because you're in a place that seems okay, that is truly absent from freedom.
However, she envisions a real train and real train stops, right? Or he writes of that.
Yes.
Okay, and that
Right.
part to me is, I call it magical, call it surrealistic.
Yeah, I would agree with you, realism. And you have to remember, she was enslaved since she was a child. So anything that she perceives. It's, her perception of different things. She doesn't have the experience. She was born into enslavement. So for her, just going to another place and experience something different from what she experienced on the plantation meant a lot.
Hi.
Hey, Joy.
So one of the things that I walked away with from this story, there was absolutely no way that I found any of her experiences to be magical.
Mm-hmm.
I found them to be her method, her coping mechanism in dealing with the trauma of slavery,
Absolutely.
the trauma of escaping, almost at times like a psychological break that she had. And this was her way of coping. To me, all of these visions were coping mechanisms for her.
Okay.
I really saw it from a psychological perspective. We know now that there was a lot of trauma, and slaves went through a lot of trauma, physical, emotional, but how did they handle it? What kind of mechanisms did they use to deal with that trauma? And I saw a lot of what she went through. A lot of her visions were psychological splits that allowed her to deal with whatever it was she was experiencing at whatever time, whether she was on the run or on a plantation somewhere.
I will agree.
So on that note, I like that Jewel was going right into our next slide, which was initial thoughts. But right before we do that, I just want to recognize two other comments in the chat, which actually go hand in hand with one another. We have Ivan Henderson that said that he would want to get some stability and a sort of livelihood and reach back. And also similar to what Sheila has to say, which was to reach back to relatives. So that seemed to be a very strong theme throughout everyone's responses.
And connection to William Still's book, The Underground Railroad, which was about trying to identify people so they could be able to reach back or at least identify where family members were. Yeah, well, now for this initial thought, two things came to my mind in relationship to that, and as I went through it. And one was when I was thinking of, as I was reading it and going through it, Dr. Asante's Afrocentricity came to mind. And I constantly, what the book seemed to left a hole for me is what he calls the consciousness of victory. Because at the end, I'm not sure whether just because of Cora's experience from one state to the next in her journey, was the way we ended, was it about victory? That was one, was it a victory? I mean, the way it ended, it was open-ended. And the other thing, which I think that was more important for me, and you see, we kind of, as me and Elise talked about it, in various chapters in the book, you see Cora's evolution of the discussion about the Declaration of Independence, right? From the point where in the early on, she's watching and Colson is talking about Michael, who is actually, kind of mimicking the Declaration and being utilized as a entertainment novelty person, and she's hearing it. And I think that that's another, when we talk about education, because it's not necessarily being in a schoolroom, it's listening and experiencing around the environment. And so she's hearing him recite the Declaration of Independence. And as she said, it doesn't, the Declaration was their masterpiece. And that's what they wanted to hear from Michael, right? The plantation owners, they had parties where they brought him in, and the history being repeated and unscrupulous. And then by the time she does escape and go to North Carolina, then she has a little bit more understanding about, and questioning, this document. And why is important to me, because in 6 years, we will be celebrating 250 years of the making of the Declaration of Independence. And even in this novel, it helps us kind of frame our discussion as people of African ancestry, as Americans. What does the Declaration mean to us, as Frederick Douglass, kind of paraphrasing what he said. And then and you'll see in this clip, we pulled out another quote, because she gets to North Carolina, and I like to just read that, because now it's a summation, it seems, of her understanding about, to her, out of this experience that she had, what does the Declaration mean? And she says, now she saw it for the joke it was, a tiny square of dirt that had convinced her. And this is her space that she held on to as an enslaved person, that was passed on from Adjoa, her grandmother, and held by her mother, and she held. And for those who read the book, know that to the degree that she went to hold on to it. And she owned something. It was washers like the cotton, she said, and weed and picket washers. Her plot was a shadow of something that lived elsewhere, out of sight. The way poor Michael reciting the Declaration of Independence was an echo of something that existed elsewhere. Now that had run away and seen a bit of the country, Cora was sure the document described anything real at all. Wasn't sure that the document described anything real at all. America was a ghost in the darkness, like her. And the reason why that struck me, because in the American African experience, one thing that we have done over coming on this 250 years and dealing with the Declaration, and in this novel, watching her go through this educational process, is defining what is core. What does freedom mean? Exactly. Because the Declaration was supposed to be defining liberty and freedom, right? But for enslaved Africans, the question was, what does freedom mean? Would you have any other thoughts in relationship to that?
Yeah, just to add, that's something that people of African descent grapple with, this whole notion of freedom and what does freedom mean to them, as well as you said, the Declaration of Independence. I think the other thing that caught my, I thought about, is the way Colson wrote the book. He gave you an idea, a reality of how the plantations and how enslaved people were treated. Because you always have people sometimes that'll say, get over it. Slavery was a long time ago. And by him being very descriptive, very detailed, and showing the brutality of how people of African descent live from day to day, and those thoughts stayed in my mind, as well as of some of it was one incident where one of the children was being beat because fear and this brutality was one way that they took and indoctrinate people to keep them in place. And Cora went over to help him and protect him. So I looked at that, and I looked at them, even though they were in these conditions, that they were still looking out for each other and still was affected by this brutality. And Jules said something very important, that we always look at enslavement in one way, but we don't look at from a point of view of trauma. Trauma is one of the things that you've seen consistently throughout the novel, this trauma. In fact, it was one incident on the Valentine's farm, and he had said, Lander was making a speech, and he says that here He says, as Lander pointed out in his speech to the residents of the Valentine's farm, here's one delusion, that we can escape slavery. We can't. Its scars will never fade. And then to me, this is where this whole notion of trauma. What I would like to ask the book club meeting, what do you think about trauma being one of the aspects that affect African people today? That what happened back in slavery is still this reoccurring theme. And I think Colson said the past is the present. So what are your thoughts on that?
I was just thinking about, as you were coming into that, the amount of trauma that you witness in this novel. It's an effective reminder, and I think it's spread all around, but I do think it's an effective reminder of how consistent and persistent the suffering is for the characters in this novel, and how it is when you look around you. There's so many parallels. Even if you don't know the term PTSD, you would suspect that such a thing exists if you look around. I mean, you even see it in, Cora's a young romantic relationship, that there's a past trauma that's a barrier even for that towards the end, or in Indiana.
Yeah.
I think it abounds, and it also, unfortunately, should remind us of what we see and experience right now. It resonates across, hundreds of years.
And it's interesting as that piece being brought up about trauma, because in the now, as you say, it's persistent, but also there's never been a moment where people who have experienced this over such a long period of time have been able to address it as a people in America.
But I think it's empowering that we are at a place where a creative person can be a historian, but also use their creative powers to bring back to the fore, the real history. I put in the chat the term magical realism earlier is just that literary term around, putting immense detail into an imagined scenario.
Right.
But I think it's a great mechanism to bring all of these ideas back to the fore. Even if people aren't into that history, it's a good read. I think, it's a tool, and it's a almost a marker of empowerment that we are at a place where we can do that. It's not the first time it's been done, but we're at a place where we can do it in a new way.
Mm-hmm. And it brings other people in, because this way it's a historical novel. Sometimes people just don't want to read facts and history just right out, but this way it brings into a storyline because it is grounded in historical information. And he's very, I like the way that he weaves seamlessly different events that happen throughout our, throughout that enslavement journey. So you got the, what you call that, I'm trying to, it skipped my mind, the sterilization eugenics and the Tuskegee, experiment. But that whole realism allows him that flexibility where he doesn't have to say in 19 whatever or 17 whatever. He just gives you that event and just seamlessly just put it into the narrative, and it flows very well.
And another example would be for that, the discussion about how the tunnels are made, who made them. I mean, it's left open-ended, but here you have in this creative fiction the ability to be able to project that. I think one of the conductors said, kind of left it when she asked, well, who did this? And he said, who do you think? We have to read into it. These are African engineers and hands that are invisibly creating these underground tunnels that is considered in this fiction a real railroad as a part of the railroad station. So it helps us reinforce that these weren't just people who had no skills and had no sense of how to liberate themselves, free themselves, but they had skills and had abilities to create tunnels and whatever. And in the real and historical real, being able to conduct these movements, especially free African abolitionists at the time.
I wanted to share 3 notes from the chat. So even before we started talking about trauma, Sheila Lewis mentioned that the brutality throughout the book, the brutality was always on her mind. And I just want to note, she said that right before we launched into the discussion. So
Right.
good timing on that, Sheila. Roberta Torian says, there's no question that we continue to suffer trauma. We continue to have self-doubt, have trouble truly trusting one another, regardless of what we verbalize and our slogans. Many still don't trust Black professionals. Many Blacks do not want to help uplift others, including coworkers or people who report to them.
The side thing that I also picked up, and the difference between those of African ancestry, when we read these historical novels, the experience that we feel, and I know that emotions and sentiment is universal, across human beings, but because it is, and the reinforcement of using that term, the experience of trauma, when we read these novels or we read these creative productions, whether they're movies or in other do we have the same visceral experience from them as the broader society who reads them? Is there a difference in experiential, emotional response? And I just say that because a lot of times I hear, especially with quote unquote slave movies, people of African descent around me would say, I don't want to see that because the impact it has in watching that experience.
That's trauma.
Yeah.
Do you think that Colson wrote this purposely to educate and to lift the consciousness of a certain audience? You think he's targeting a certain audience? Because sometimes people they don't take it as serious as you say, or sometimes it's so traumatic. But if you don't reveal the truth, if you don't deal with it, then how can we confront what's going on in this whole notion of democracy?
You mentioned earlier that this is translated into 40 languages.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So in this novel, obviously, as a universal notion, right?
Yes.
Obviously, it touches different people, or there's an interest by different people in different cultures and different parts of the world having different experiences. And therefore, there's some universality, that he speaks to at least different groups identifying with that experience personally in one way. And maybe, as you say, on the other hand, other groups who are becoming aware
Exactly.
of the
Educate.
experience that others have went through or are going through, and then making them more informed about how they should view that in their personal life. So I think there is a universal and a particular to that, what is brought out in the novel.
And I think one way to do it is to educate people. And I think that Colson that's exactly, to me, what he attempts to do, is to educate those who don't see and don't have that historical background, even in this country. As Jimmy Baldwin said, we have to confront the lie, and we haven't done that. And so this novel helps you to see it firsthand through all this brutality and to educate that this did happen.
Did you have any favorite quotes, characters, or highlights from the book?
Let's open it up to the book club members. If they have any favorite quotes or characters or highlights that they've seen that resonated with them throughout the novel.
Yeah, hi, Elise. This is Barbara.
Hey, Barbara.
I wrote this extensive quote by Ridgway. Now, that might kind of sound a little bit odd.
That's okay.
Well, when I saw it, I said, well, you know what? This guy is speaking of the quote unquote manifest destiny and of all the racists in the world, those particularly in the United States. And it's kind of set up, this would do well on CNN right now, what we're going through.
Right.
And I'm just going to read a little bit of it. American philosophy, taking what is yours, your property, whatever you deem
I
it
have that
is
too.
to be. Everyone else taking their assigned places to allow you to take it, whether it's red men or Africans
Yep.
giving up themselves so that we can have what's rightfully ours. I prefer the American spirit. Then he goes on to say, call to us from the old world to the new world to conquer, build civilization, destroy what needs to be destroyed, left to the lesser races. If not lift up, subjugate, or exterminate. That was like such a woe for me. And
And,
that
Mhm.
we are still experiencing that.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Barbara.
and it's interesting that you picked that one, Barbara, because as you can see, those that can see, we pulled up also, which is interesting in itself, right? Why Ridgeway? Because the other side of his thinking, besides the domineering, the manifest destiny, as you say,
Hmm.
position, he also expressed the particular fear, right? He
Hmm.
says, people like you and your mother are the best of the race.
Hmm.
The weak of the tribe have been weeded out. They die in the slave ships. They die of our European pox in the fields working our cotton and indigo. You need to be strong to survive the labor and to make us greater. We fatten hogs, not because it pleases us greater. We fatten hogs, not because it pleases us, but because we need hogs to survive. But we can't have you too clever. We can't have you so fit out. We can't have you so fit you outrun us. And so on one hand, it's that conquering spirit, but at the same time, it's the underlying fear of, though we want you to be strong, but we don't want you to be strong and wise enough to where you move ahead in playing this game. Now, this is someone who's not a plantation owner. His job is what some would say the present day police job.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
To be able to capture,
Hmm.
to maintain those who would see the laws are not to be adhered. And it's just interesting about the laws because, in the slave catcher's perspective, because in this moment that's played out in this novel, all the laws that are on the books and the fundamental laws for us of defining what freedom is and exerting our own liberty is breaking the nation state by state laws
Hmm.
itself.
Hmm.
So how do you reconcile a people who are bound by a society that's bound by law, but at the same time, people who are exerting their natural right to be human, to be free, by doing that is breaking those same laws. And I thought that was so, Barbara. And it's that conquering spirit that you picked up, and I guess we picked up
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
coincides that our understanding again, to what the novel
And
brings out.
what also struck me was the structure of the novel, that Colin was really breaking all the rules.
Absolutely. And he meant
He was
to.
telling a story that some people might find old, old, but the way he told it was, to me, absolutely amazing. And he pulled things from a lot of the slave narratives that I've read over time
And he said that.
to construct this. And he told a woman's story.
Yes.
So all of those things really struck me as Absolutely fascinating. And because he dared to do that, he pulled off that Pulitzer Prize. And we
Yes,
all know who was reading the books.
absolutely. And he
Yeah,
was able to put so much in there, Barbara,
absolutely.
breaking all the rules. And you know certain events happen. If you are a history person, you know that they happen at a certain point, but he was able to do that really just seamlessly, just add these different situations in there. And they were out of time. I mean, a different century, and he would go back and forth telling this story, trying to get to me the full breadth of what happened historically to people of African descent.
Exactly.
And he did a wonderful job. Even the building of the community with John Valentine's,
Hmm.
showing that, uh, people with means that, I mean, John Valentine had a white father and a black mother, and he was able to pass for white. And just the way that he took and support African, built that community.
Hannah said something about changing your appearance, but there was a part in the book that said a person who has never been enslaved doesn't carry themselves in the same way.
Hmm.
So, besides changing your appearance, you have to kind of change your whole persona. You got to command the earth.
Mm.
That's hard.
I like
That's
that,
very
Barb.
difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I see that. I see Jewel
I
has
like
her
that.
hand up.
I just wanted to make the comment that I don't know that I would personally use the term educate when it comes to Colson. I would say his attempt, or he really wants to re-educate people.
Okay. Okay.
Because we have been given this false narrative for years, and it's even getting worse about slavery and what it was and how it was.
Mm-hmm.
But his portrayal gives a much more real
Yes.
description of
Mm-hmm.
what it was like.
Yes.
So I would have chosen the term re-educate. We've already been educated, we've been miseducated.
Okay.
So he and many others are now in the process of re-educating.
And could I add to, and those people who don't know the history too, being educated one time too, those people who don't know the history and refuse to want to know the history too.
I think that everybody on the planet knows something about slavery, period, here in the United States.
Whether they want to admit it or not.
Whether, oh, sure. What I'm getting at is what they know and what it was are two different things. What
Mm-hmm.
they may know, I mean, and I think about Texas, who was trying to change the narrative about slavery and
The
the
language.
textbooks,
Mm-hmm.
and how Black people didn't mind being slaves and they were taken care of. That false education
Mm-hmm.
is being brought to light by people like Colson. And that's where the re-education, the re-educating of a country is taking place. But that's just the way I see it.
Is there anybody else, Hannah, that put something in the chat or may have a comment that they want to share in the time we have left?
Yes, I wanted to highlight something that docent Annie put in a little while ago. She said the scientists today have stated that trauma is on the genes of those people who have history
Right.
of that experience in their ancestors. So we didn't get to mention that when she first wrote it in, but I want to bring it back now.
And if,
Yeah.
if I can use that to say,
Yeah.
when you brought up about the docents and all of us who are engaged in trying to, expand the interpretation, the narrative, the interaction of this experience that Colson Whitehead puts out in Underground Railroad. For us docents, this interpretation, because we are the ones that also have to engage folks to be not afraid or feel isolated because they may experience the trauma, because it's important to bring it out. And then on the other hand, by us taking people, even with Audacious Freedom, being able to show people, Americans, that it's important for us to be able to explore and have these kind of discussions, whether they're done by fiction or whether they're done by not just historical fiction, but by history. It's important for us, and not to try to hide from it, because there is universal lessons about how human beings need to, want to, aspire to live with each other in order to be able to create what some would say a more perfect union or a more perfect society.
Mm-hmm. I would like to add, for those of you who have read the novel, Colson has Cora coming out of the Underground Railroad and connecting with a caravan of 3 wagons going west. So he kind of left it open. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? What Colson may be saying, that she found freedom, or what are your thoughts that he left it open like that? And I think he left it open purposely. So some of the readers and read the book, what are your thoughts on that ending? Do you think she had found some type of resolution because she did connect with this caravan of wagons that were going west? Or I
would say no way.
No way.
And that, it's interesting, Elise, because that's why I walked away with, and the reason of, my initial thoughts about the consciousness of victory, because there was no sense in the end of a being victorious, especially after all the different experiences, North Carolina with, as you say, eugenics, South Carolina, as far as being isolated and the thing, and then even in Indiana, the community being destroyed.
But do you think that Colson left it open like that simply because we're still searching for this whole notion of freedom, justice, and equality? So just because she joined this caravan doesn't mean that it's over, that we're still searching for this very thing that we have not been able to get fully, equally, like our white counterparts. What do you?
Just like this moment with this book discussion, it'll be left open for us to continue to dialogue and see, and how this goes. So I would say let us continue to attend and look out for future book discussions that AMP is having, and other docents will participate in, and just leave it at that.
Mm-hmm. And we did have, we had, I just want to make note of the few responses that we did have to your question, Alicia.
Okay.
I haven't said no way. It was just enough at the beginning.
Yeah.
Annie Thomason says, let the struggle begin in the covert. And I've also said that the promise, yes, he said that the promise of the West never panned out, did it? But that was a question. So that's definitely another follow-up for another time. And he ended with saying that this was an excellent discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Thank you all. I'm now bringing on LaRonda Richardson to give a note about the AMP gift shop.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. I just wanted to point out that AMP's new online gift shop is open and available for you to purchase AMP merchandise right now. We have a host of things, and if you want to scan the QR code that you see here with your phones, you can also visit it with the link, and I will also drop the link in the chat.
So with that, I want to thank you all for coming out, and have a good rest of your evening.